Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Paddocks. Today, we're going to be doing a little history lesson on the grid girls of Formula One. We know, there was some controversy around this, so we're really just going to give you the rundown of who they were. On this episode, we have Ito, Hanna, and myself, Chelsea. And to start us off, we have Hanna with some history on how they first began.
So, Formula One grid girls were employed by the sport for decades to conduct promotional tasks. These included wearing clothes bearing the names of sponsors and appearing on the track before races. You could also see them in other sports as well. MotoGP is a great example. The grid girls are best known for holding driver name boards on the grid and lining the corridor through which driver walks on their way to the podium and if they finish in the top three. The number of grid girls have gone on to become household names through their successful modeling careers. This included well-known Kelly Brook, Jodie Marsh, Emma Noble, Melinda Messenger, and even Nell McAndrew for my fashion people out there. It is not known exactly how much each grid girl made for their appearance, but a number have said the money was able to support the early years of their modeling careers or their college/university education.
So, supposedly, the first girl was Rosa Ogawa. I could be saying that wrong. And her first appearance was in the late 1960s. I couldn't find the exact date, but it was a motor race in Japan to represent the race winners. So basically what we would see with the numbers and all that. And her role and the popularity that race got because of her and everything, it went on to cement the grid girls as an icon at the racetracks. Now, if you haven't heard the term grid girls in your country, it's because some locations, they do have different names for it. So they're not known as grid girls. There's race queens in Japan, pit babes in Britain, pretties in Thailand, racing models in Korea, and there was a few more. And I mean, honestly, there was a lot of options out there, but for the rest of the episode and majority, we refer to them as grid girls.
And even though they might have gone by a whole host of different names, what they wore was typically relatively similar. And it was usually characterized by glamorous and sleek and often attention-grabbing attire reflecting the high-energy atmosphere, especially for Formula One events, but even with other racing series. And these outfits usually followed the same formula, if you will. They were form-fitting outfits, mostly dresses, and they basically wore those dresses or outfits that hugged their figures and emphasized their curves to illustrate that whole idea of glamour. These dresses were typically tailored to be flattering and stylish with cuts and designs that were in line with current fashion trends for mostly the European races and then some races such as China, Japan, and other Asian races oftentimes would also draw in cultural references. But as Hanna mentioned, due to the promotional nature of their work, they often also wore promotional attire, meaning adorned with sponsorship logos, team colors, or other promotional elements. This allowed sponsors to gain visibility and exposure during pre-race festivities. And of course, we can't forget the shoes, which were always high heels. This was done, on one hand, to do things like add height and elegance to their overall look, but on the other, high heels are, and also back then, were a simple sign of femininity, and the grid girls were there to represent the epitome of that, plus sex sells, so there's always that aspect. Of course, the heels were often chosen to complement the outfits and enhance the overall glamour. Lastly, we can't forget about the accessories. Grid girls often accessorize their outfits with items like hats, such as cowboy hats like Coda, or sunglasses or jewelry, adding to the polished and sophisticated aesthetic. These accessories help to complete their looks on one hand and added a touch of personality at the same time, but they could also be seen wearing necklaces, rings, and other jewelry displaying sponsorship logos. For example, in MotoGP, you often see the Monster Energy girls wearing necklaces with the Monster Energy like claw logo. But overall, the fashion worn by these girls was carefully curated to contribute to the spectacle and excitement of Formula One and motorsports in general, and often, of course, aligned with the branding and promotional goals of the individual sponsors and teams.
And I mean, like Ito said, sex sells. And motorsports really just used that vantage point heavily with the grid girls. The countries that were on the F1 calendar, all of them, they had like their rich story and fashion. So really the only thing that kind of disappointed me when I was looking at all the history of this was just that a lot of them didn't really go all out in these outfits. You know, they didn't really try to like bring in their culture and their story and really anything that was more interesting than sex sells. But they did try a little bit. The thing is, like, Australia's outfits, if you look at them, they would have fit at a polo match. Okay, China's outfits, a little more elegant. Usually the dress fabric was inspired by their culture and things like that. The Austrians would wear these, I think I'm pronouncing it dirndls, and it's like a dress style from their country. And then the Middle East had the outfits that, again, if you look at them, it's probably something your flight attendant would wear. So it wasn't really anything like exciting. And I mean, I don't know. I feel like if you're going to bring these girls into it for women to entertain us or whatever it was that the reason, at least make the fashion fun, you know, something we would want to wear. Now, since a lot of countries didn't do the whole bringing in their culture thing, they basically just did a lot of like odd cutouts and like flashing tops, those really short mini skirts, the really low-waisted, tight-fitting pants, which there's like this Hungarian outfit that was a little out there, and I was just like, oh, cool. But it wasn't until Texas where we saw them like hone in on the city's culture to create their outfits, and that's why I really want to talk about the Coda Girls. So Austin, Texas, if I'm not wrong, started hosting the races for Formula One back in 2012. And what they chose to do with their Coda Girls was not put them under F1 licensing. Now, because of this, the designer, Bennett, he got some freedom for like designing the Coda Girls look without following those like title, sponsor, and F1 rules. So finally, we saw the city's culture and basically a little bit of, I guess, technically American culture, if that's a thing, designing the Grid Girls clothing to embody like really country and cowboy look of like the state. So he still made them sexy. Don't worry, he did that. And they were still very feminine. But it kind of went above the sex sells, and he went and really tried to bring in the culture that was missing. So you saw like the kind of like cowboy vest, the jackets. There was like skirts in like these soft winter white colors. There was like two-tone options that they had. And the skirt designs were either pleated or fringe. I personally love the fringe. And it was just really cool seeing like the southwestern flair. They also had like these really large turquoise like jewelry pieces. So basically the outfits were screaming red, white, and blue. And they definitely showcased like the Texan style because turquoise jewelry really is big there. Now, being a Coda girl or a good girl in general, it actually did come with some heavy work, okay? Look, I know it's a very laid back look for the career, but there was an interview with one of the Coda girls, and I did laugh. But her name was Amanda Bigman, and she explained, I've been waking up at about 4 o'clock in the morning. The drivers probably get to sleep in and wait for their crew to get their stuff together. And there were a few rules the Grid Girls had to adhere to on the track. So there's no talking to drivers or any of the personnel unless spoken to first, which sounds familiar to the volunteer rules. There's also a rule where, like, if you're in a non-working situation and you run into them, apparently you're not supposed to interact with the drivers in general. So I guess they really tried to push that professional boundary. They were also required to complete a 3-stage interview process. The team was pretty varied. At least the Coda girls, I didn't know too much about the like grid girls in general, but in Coda, the manager for the program, she really tried to focus on like inclusion and just going beyond what was probably deemed like stereotypical beauty. So they had Asian, Latino, white, African American girls. They didn't have an age range. So one of the girls at the time was even 38. So they really just kind of went for personality. Of course, they also went for looks, but not specific looks. And they went for really personal because they would mostly use these girls to attend like events and things for the Formula One like name. In another interview, when they were talking to the Coda girls kind of like about their experience with the job, they had an interview with Ditto. She was the manager. She explained the job came with a salary. It had a year-long contract. Most of the women still held down like full-time jobs and or were in college, like Hanna was saying earlier. But of course, being a Coda girl or grid girl, it came with a few downsides. Specifically, the insistence of being hit on when it just wasn't wanted. Ditto, the manager, she even stated, I had to be the bad cop. If the environment goes sour, then we just quickly assess the situation and get out of there. And she said that this came to like attending paddock clubs, the crowd, and like even VIP areas. Didn't matter who, didn't matter where, it happened. Now, what I did find funny was the manager was asked, like, well, why don't you hire men? And she's like, well, no one applies. But Grid Boys have never made an appearance in, like, Coda. They made a rare appearance in Formula One in the European Grand Prix in Valencia. But there was no Coda Boys for the Texan Grand Prix.
So, shortly after, and I want to say it was about 2018, society's view kind of shifted on the girls and the program in general. So, Formula One axed its grid girls after decades of employing women to parade the pit lane and the starting grid. So, the Sports American owners, Liberty Media, said the practice no longer represents its brand values, but has sparked a backlash from models saying their choices are being dictated by the PC brigade, if I said that right. The move came just days after darts bosses said walk-on girls would be scrapped from the sport altogether. And even the chiefs at the Professional Darts Corporation, which is other sports where kind of grid girls or girls kind of were a thing as well, told those hired for the televised Masters tournament not to show up following feedback from host broadcasters. And Formula One bosses say they have been looking at ways to bring the sport into line with others in terms of equality. Sean Bratches, managing director of commercial operations at Formula One, said, while the practice of employing grid girls has been a staple of Formula One Grand Prix for decades, we feel this custom does not resonate with our brand values and clearly is at odds with the modern day societal norms. We don't believe the practice is appropriate or relevant to Formula One and its fans, old and new, across the world. That's actually pretty sad.
So I was curious to like how the public responded online when all of this was happening, so I went straight to Reddit. And I was just honestly reading through the forums and like how mixed the replies were. And yes, I know Reddit can sometimes be a burning trash can, but other times it's fun to see the response to things happening in society. Now, we had, of course, those extremists that were like, what's next? Removing cheerleaders from football? Which obviously, no, it's a whole completely different thing. But there was a large response of the sport really didn't revolve around the need for grid girls anyway for this like kind of entertainment. So like you were going to the races to watch your favorite drivers, your teams. You weren't looking for a grid girl unless she was your friend maybe. But this is when we started seeing people talk about other options to replace the grid girls, and that was the grid kids. Now, after the removal of grid girls, they had ideas for new teams that, can continue their work. So the sponsorships, the race walks, etc. And the idea for grid kids came out. Formula One and the FIA announced the new partnership, and basically the pre-race ceremony was more relevant. It was interesting for fans, especially the younger ones, and this did make me think of the program. I don't know if anyone else caught it last season, and they I think already did one race this season, but F1 Kids does like a TV version of the races now, and we saw F1 focus on like the younger audience, working with like the kid announcers, doing interviews, or actually them interviewing the drivers. And F1 Kids did so well last season that they decided to do it for 2024. So you have 7 races that you can watch the live feed from. And the next race is actually going to be in Monaco, that the kids are going to be doing their own coverage.
Yeah, and kind of in reference to what Chelsea said, it also kind of goes hand in hand with what a lot of Formula One teams are now doing, which is the STEM program. And so I think this also plays a part in it and helps like those kids as well, and they get that live environment of learning more about the education of Formula One in the sport.
Plus, I mean, having kid commentators, for lack of a better word, just makes it, because like if you watch the kids in quote unquote coverage, they also explain it in a very easy to understand way, like the races, the different technical components, everything else. So I feel like Formula Kids is a good way also for younger fans to get into the sport, not just in terms of representation, but also understanding what's happening.
I do think that this program was knock out of the park idea. They ended up working alongside ASNs, which is the FIA recognized national sporting authorities. And this program, it basically provides a unique opportunity for kids and their families. They don't send the kid alone, to be a part of like really exclusive and exciting race weekend, the whole race weekend. So the children are chosen either based on motorsport clubs. So like if they're in one on merit, they get chosen by lottery. And they are sometimes even already competing in karting or junior Formula One teams. Now, the lucky ones, which if I'm not wrong, it's about 20 kids, are able to accompany and stand alongside the F1 drivers on the grid as they prepare for the race. And when possible, they will put them in F2 and GP3. So they are accompanied by immediate family. I think like they only do siblings and parents. And those also those like family members also receive paddock access for the race on Sunday. I will say something that had me though while I was like looking into this is, while most children are like either in motorsport related things, like karts or little clubs, it was almost like tear jerking to learn that Las Vegas is going to have foster children from the Clark County, Nevada place attending as grid kids for the Las Vegas GP this year. I think it was like 5 to 8 kids. And the grid program, it goes beyond motorsport kids in the sport, and it's trying to just bring in those who enjoy watching the race and kind of want to be in that atmosphere. Now, Sean Bratches, he was the F1 managing director of the commercial operations at the time when the program was first starting up. He was quoted saying, "What an unforgettable experience for them and their families. An inspiration to keep driving, training, and learning so that they can dream of one day being here themselves." One grid kid you might know about is Formula One's very own Oscar Piastri. He was a grid kid for Australia back in 2015, and now he's one of PGP's fave drivers on the track. So maybe the guy was right about it, inspiring the children to keep on driving.
I mean, grid kids is a great idea, honestly. And if it gets more kids into the sport, moving through the pipeline, why not? But we talked about grid girls as like a whole and their role in Formula One. But what about female drivers? Were there ever female Formula One drivers? Well, while there were always women trying to get into the upper echelons of motorsports like Formula One from the get-go, from the 1950s and honestly even before, historically very few succeeded. Names like Leila Lombardi or Maria Teresa de Filippis are basically the fair few that made it. And even those names aren't household names because at the end of the day, Formula One is still a boys' club. But since its inception, only 5 women have participated in Grand Prix races, with just 2 managing to qualify and start. Leila Lombardi holds the distinction of the most entries with 17 and the most starts with 12. Notably though, Desiree Wilson remains the sole female victor in a Formula One race. Caveat though, she achieved this in the British Aurora Formula One Championship at Brands Hatch in 1980, so technically not a Grand Prix weekend. Now, Maria Teresa de Filippis was really the forerunner when it came to women in Formula One because she was the first one in 1958 and 1959 securing a best finish of 10th place. And quick reminder, it used to be that 10th place did not get any points, hence she's not the one that scored points. That would be Leila Lombardi. Though, while the early days of Formula One did see a fair few women compete, it took 15 years without female representation for Leila Lombardi to enter the scene in the mid-70s. And as I said, notably becoming the first and only woman to score a championship point, although it's half a point, so, but at least half. And then we have, of course, 1976, where Galicia, alongside Lombardi, attempted to qualify for the British GP, marking a very, very rare occasion of multiple female racers in a Formula One event. Sadly, both failed to qualify. And then we skip ahead to 1980, where once again, Desiree Wilson attempted to qualify for a GP, but as I said previously, it wasn't until later that year that she finally saw the checkered flag in first place. Lastly, of course, there is Giovanna Amati, and she made a bid for Formula One in '92 with Brabham after failing to qualify for 3 races. Her stint was cut short, especially because the team subsequently folded as well. Now, these were race drivers, and let's be honest, there weren't a lot of them. But what about test drivers? Were there women at least allowed to test drive the cars? Honestly, it does look slightly better on that front because several female drivers have participated in Formula One related activities beyond racing. One of them being Sarah Fisher, a IndyCar driver who test drove / demonstrated a McLaren in 2002, while Catherine Liege tested for Minardi in 2005. And of course, there's Susie Wolff, who's been contracted as a development and test drivers. Wolff notably participated in a practice session at the British GP in 2014, marking the first female Formula One involvement in a race weekend in over 2 decades. And then, of course, we have, dare I say, the tragedy of Maria de Villota. She served as a test driver for Marussia until her tragic crash in 2012 at a racetrack. And while the likes of Simona De Silvestro and Carmen Yorda were affiliated with Sauber and Lotus respectively, it was Tatiana Calderon joining Sauber as a development driver in 2017 and being promoted to a test driver in 2018 and conducting her first F1 car test in Monaco. And of course, there is Jamie Chadwick. And if you know a bit about female racers, you definitely, especially contemporary female racers, you definitely know that name because she was a prominent W Series contender and became a development driver for Williams in 2019 and continues in that role. And then lastly, but not least, of course, we have Jessica Hawkins, who we've done a spotlight on actually. And she became an ambassador for Aston Martin last year in 2023 and tested a 2021 F1 spec car at the Hungaroring that year as part of her role, and even did further tests later on that year and even early this year. But now that we gave you the history of Grid Girls, of female drivers, of what Grid Girls turned into now, let's talk about Grid Girls in other racing series. And I actually especially want to highlight Grid Girls in MotoGP right now because, as some of you might know, MotoGP was just acquired by Liberty Media, and there are a lot of rumors swirling that due to the acquisition of MotoGP by Liberty Media, Grid Girls will be phased out there.
Well, I mean, like you mentioned earlier, we did see them at Circuit of Americas for MotoGP, so the Monster Energy Grid Girls. So they're still out there, and they're popping. They're doing just fine. Honestly, I wonder if, at least in the eyes of Liberty, if this was like a social move because of society norms and they really want to take women seriously, or if it was just a decision to move the sponsorship somewhere else and restructure and just made it like a business thing. Because as it is, programs like MotoGP Grid Girls are still going strong, and I know we just won't know until like we see what happens now with Liberty taking over MotoGP, but like I think Liberty's in charge of either basketball or football, and they still have cheerleaders. So I mean, I'm not saying I agree with the dumb Reddit guy from earlier, like what about the cheerleaders? But he's not wrong. I mean, you left the cheerleaders and then you took off the Grid Girls. So does it align with you or does it not align with you?
I will say the way of MotoGP sponsorships happen are rumored to be changing over the coming years. As I said, those are just rumors. And I think we could see a change and shift there as well. I know Moto America is looking to move away from Grid Girls too. We've seen that slowly phase out, but nothing officially has been said. I will say though, while in Formula One, Grid Girls are not allowed to talk to any drivers, that is completely different in MotoGP. And a lot of the drivers have actually met their spouses through Grid Girls. I mean, Valentino Rossi met his wife through there. Who else? Randy De La Ponte, Zarco, Alexis. I could go on. There's quite a few, new and retired at this point. So who knows? Maybe because of that, they'll keep them. The drivers will probably fight for that because who knows? It could be their future wife.
And honestly, with Grid Girls, also, of course, came this idea that motor racing is sexy also for the females. And that then oftentimes translated into more racing-inspired fashion. Like, for example, in the 1950s and 1960s and even later, and even now, we see a resurgence of racing inspired, say, leather jackets. Often you also see a lot of like checkered flag prints and other subtle nods towards racing. And I feel like because we had that Grit Girl aesthetic, dare I say, or Grit Girls in general, we had that translation. And if we didn't have those Grit Girls, we wouldn't have had those fashion influences, at least not in the female sphere of things. Guys might be a different story, but then again, I feel like oftentimes it starts with the ladies and then it goes to the guys. It doesn't usually start with the guys and goes to the girls.
Well, I mean, let's be honest here. Most of the time, the women dress the men, like if you're in a relationship. So it kind of makes sense. But then also, I think we've gotten a lot of like ideas of what that looks like in a lot of ways when going to the race weekend, because you understand the vibes and the concept and the elaborations behind it, especially like in the paddock, which is different from like general admission, let's be honest, because in general admission you're going for comfort. Paddock, you're going for stylish and maybe even sexy, depending on who you are. So I could see that, and it's also pretty cool to see like the different influences have changed over the years when it comes to fashion.
The interesting part is also how now the wives and girlfriends of drivers are oftentimes considered these like fashion icons, when they used to be more about like helping the driver rather than being, dare I say, an accessory to the driver or known for their fashion. I mean, I've seen so many fan accounts of, say, Carmen Mondit, George Russell's girlfriend, or Lily Minahi, the golfer who incidentally is Alex Albon's girlfriend, like all these Instagram accounts like dissecting their outfits and where to buy like dupes and stuff like that. So I feel like the more popular F1 gets, especially with women, with female fans, the more we will see this like blending of fashion and F1. I mean, we even see it with things like the McLaren sponsorship with collection with Reese, or the Abercrombie and Hollister stuff Williams and McLaren are doing, or I mean, off the top of my head, I could name so many, but I feel like it's just too much at this point, because it's not just fan-made merch, it's also like high fashion brands and high street fashion getting into the whole hype. And I feel like that's gonna shift the whole perception of the ties of Formula One and motorsports in general and fashion as well.
I am so calling myself out on this one, but I am one of those girls who follow said fan accounts for fashion tips and where to find things. No, I have not ever bought any of it, but Kika, you have some pretty nice outfits. I'm not going to lie. Pierre, Kika, yes.
I mean, even just Hannah, you making this comment kind of proves my point, like, and how interconnected everything is. And I mean, honestly, you're not alone in this. I do it too. Like, for example, last year when Alex, Charles's girlfriend, first came onto the scene, quote unquote, she was wearing a black meshki dress, and I hunted that dress down, like literally. And because yes, was it a pretty dress? Yes. I mean, I still have it, but did I buy it because she wore it? Yes, at the end of the day. And I feel like that says it all. especially, as I said, with the expanding fan base of female fans, because it shows the whole idea of you don't only have to like Formula One because, say, you're a gearhead or say you're into the technical aspect of things. You can also like Formula One if you like to dress nice. Like, they're not two mutually exclusive things. And I wish we had Rachel on, because I feel like Rachel would have so many good insights on this, because fashion is her thing too. So it's kind of a bummer she's not on right now, but maybe we can do something else later about this. Now that we kind of touched on Formula One and fashion and their ever stronger growing ties, we actually wanted to close it out here with a driver of the week this time. And that driver is Leila Lombardi, because she was the first and only woman to score a point, or half a point, in F1, and for that, she deserves all the praise.
I don't know about you, but I love talking about grid girls and kind of the evolution of motorsports over time, and even some wonderful women who have raced or been test drivers for motorsports. Now, what was your favorite part of the episode? Let us know on our socials. Everywhere we are Paddock Girls Podcast, except Twitter or X. There you can find us at Paddock Girls Pod. Thank you for joining us in the paddock. See you next time, where we chat all things Imola and race weekend. Bye.
Bye.